Don't pay attention to Nadine. She's used to standing behind others.
She's always the quiet one. It's easier this way. Miss Nadine Uwase, you've been named in a legal inheritance. What? The estate belongs entirely to you. To me?
In your opinion, what hurts more, being looked down on by strangers or being quietly held back by the one you trust the most? Share your thoughts and tell me which city you're watching from. At exactly 6:12 a.m., in a small tailoring workshop tucked between two narrow streets in Kigali, Nadine Uwas quietly adjusted the collar of a half-finished dress. The morning light filtered through the worn curtains, casting soft golden lines across the fabrics scattered on the wooden table. No one spoke her name, not because they didn't know it, but because Nadine had grown used to not being the center of attention. "Can you pass me the blue thread?" one of the women asked. Nadine nodded, handing it over without a word. She didn't need to speak loudly. She didn't need to be seen. For years, she had learned something very simple. If you stay quiet, you won't be judged. At least, that's what she believed. Her phone buzzed lightly at 6:27 a.m. A message from Keza. "I'm at a photo shoot. You should come sometime. It's fun." Nadine stared at the screen for a few seconds before typing back, "I'm busy today. Maybe another time." She always said that, not because she was always busy, but because she didn't know how to exist in spaces where people actually looked at her. Keza was everything Nadine was not: confident, elegant, effortlessly admired. Wherever Keza went, attention followed. Wherever Nadine stood, silence stayed. Later that morning, at 9:45 a.m., a customer walked into the shop. She looked around, then pointed at a dress displayed near the window. "Who made this?" she asked. One of the older women smiled and gestured toward Keza's photo hanging on the wall. "Our designer," she said proudly. Nadine lowered her head slightly, because she knew the truth. She had stitched that dress, every line, every detail, every adjustment. But she didn't correct them. She never did, not because she couldn't, but because it felt easier to let someone else be seen. At exactly 11:03 a.m., Mama Chantal, the owner of the workshop, stepped in. "Nadine," she called softly. Nadine looked up immediately. "Yes, Mama, come with me." They walked into the small back room where old boxes were stacked neatly against the wall. Mama Chantal reached into one of them and pulled out a faded notebook. "This belonged to Nirabera," she said. Nadine froze. Everyone in the workshop knew that name. Nirabera was the founder, the woman who had started everything decades ago, the woman people still spoke about with quiet respect. "She left this behind," Mama Chantal continued. "And for some reason, I think you should have it." Nadine hesitated. "Me?" Mama Chantal nodded. "You remind me of her." Nadine almost laughed, not out loud, but inside, because she had never once been compared to someone important, not in a good way. "I'm not." Nadine started, then stopped. Mama Chantal placed the notebook gently into her hands. "You don't have to believe it yet," she said. "Just keep it." That afternoon at 2:18 p.m., Nadine sat alone by the window during her short break. She opened the notebook. The pages were filled with sketches, designs, notes, ideas. But one sentence, written in slightly faded ink, made her pause. "A woman does not become invisible because she lacks beauty, but because she forgets to see herself." Nadine stared at the words for a long time. Something about it felt uncomfortable, not because it was wrong, but because it was too close to the truth she had never said out loud. At exactly 5:07 p.m., the workshop began to quiet down. People packed their things. Conversations faded. Nadine carefully placed the notebook into her bag. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like disappearing immediately. She walked out onto the street. The city was alive. Cars passing, people talking, life moving forward, and for a brief moment, Nadine didn't rush to stay behind. She simply stood there. watching, thinking, and somewhere deep inside her, a question began to form, a quiet one, but powerful enough to change everything. What if I don't have to stay invisible anymore? At exactly 7:16 a.m., the next morning, Nadine Uwase arrived at the workshop earlier than usual. Not because she had more work, but because she couldn't stop thinking about the sentence in the notebook. A woman does not become invisible because she lacks beauty, but because she forgets to see herself. The word stayed with her. Quiet, persistent. She placed her bag down, took out the notebook, and opened it again, this time more slowly. She didn't rush through the pages. She studied them. Each sketch, each note, each unfinished idea. It wasn't just a collection of designs. It was a voice. A woman who had once believed her work deserved to be seen. At 8:03 a.m., Mama Chantal walked in and noticed Nadine already working. "You're early today," she said. Nadine nodded lightly. "I couldn't sleep as much." Mama Chantal didn't ask more. She simply watched Nadine for a moment, long enough to notice something had shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. Later that morning, at 10:28 a.m., a new client entered the workshop. She was well-dressed, confident, and clearly used to making decisions quickly. "I need something original," the woman said. "Not something I've seen everywhere." The room grew slightly tense, because original meant pressure, and pressure usually meant Keza. "She's not here yet," one of the women said. The client frowned slightly. "Then who else designs hers?" There was a brief silence, not long, but long enough to reveal a habit. No one looked at Nadine, until Mama Chantal spoke. "Nadine can show you something." All eyes turned. Nadine froze for a second. Not because she didn't know how to design, but because she wasn't used to being the answer. I can try," she said. The client walked closer. "Show me what you have." Nadine hesitated, then slowly reached for the notebook in her bag. Not her usual sketches, but nearer Beras. She opened to a page she had studied earlier that morning, a design that combined traditional patterns with modern cuts. Simple but thoughtful. The client leaned in. Her expression changed. "This? Who made this?" Nadine swallowed lightly. For a brief moment, she almost said what she always said. "It's not mine." But something stopped her, a small voice, but stronger than before. I've been working on it," Nadine said. Not a lie, but not the full truth either. The client nodded slowly. "It's different," she said. "I like it." Nadine felt something shift inside her. Not excitement, not pride. Just a small opening at exactly 11:42 a.m. Keza walked into the workshop, confident as always, effortless. "Sorry I'm late," she said, placing her bag down. "Photoshoot ran over." The client turned. "Oh, you must be the designer." Yes. The answer came naturally, automatically, like it always had. Nadine stood still, watching, the familiar pattern unfolding again. But this time, it didn't feel the same. The client gestured toward the notebook. "She showed me something interesting." Kiza glanced at it briefly, then smiled again. "Oh, that?" "Yes, we've been experimenting with a few ideas." Nadine noticed the word. She didn't react, didn't interrupt, didn't correct, but something inside her didn't agree anymore. At 1:17 p.m., the client placed the deposit. "For this design," she said, looking at Kiza, not Nadine, of course. It made sense, that's how it has always been. But as the client left, she turned back once more. "And you," she said, pointing gently at Nadine, "don't stop drawing." It wasn't a big moment, no applause, no dramatic recognition. Just a simple sentence, but it landed differently. That afternoon, at 4:36 p.m., Nadine sat alone again by the window. She opened the notebook, but this time, she didn't just read. She took out a pen, and for the first time in years, she added her own line, not copying, not following, just drawing. Her hand hesitated at first, then moved, slowly, carefully, but surely, because something had changed, not outside, not yet, but inside her. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. At exactly 8:14 a.m., the following day, the workshop felt different. Nothing had changed on the outsides. The same wooden tables, the same fabrics, the same quiet rhythm of needles moving through cloth. But inside Nadine Uwas, something no longer fit the way it used to. She sat in her usual place, same corner, same posture, but not the same person. The notebook lay in her bag, closed, but present, like a voice waiting to be heard. At 9:02 a.m., Keza walked in, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her tone warm and effortless as always. The women responded immediately. Smiles, energy, attention. Nadine glanced up, just for a second, then back down, like she had always done. But this time, it felt like a choice, not a habit, and that made all the difference. Later that morning, at 10:37 a.m., Mama Chantal gathered everyone. "We have an important order," she announced. "A client from Nairobi wants a full collection, not just one piece." A murmur spread across the room. A collection meant visibility, opportunity, pressure. Keza stepped forward slightly. "I can lead it," she said. No hesitation, no doubt. It was expected. It was normal. Mama Chantal nodded slowly. "I know you can," she said. "But this time, I want to try something different." The room went quiet, not tense, but curious. "I want Nadine to co-lead the project." Silence. Real silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that makes people look at each other. The kind that exposes what no one says out loud. Keza's expression didn't change immediately, but something in her eyes tightened. Nadine felt it before she even looked up. "Are you sure?" Keza asked, her voice still calm. Not confrontational, but careful. Mama Chantal nodded. "Yes." Another pause. Then Keza smiled. A controlled smile. "Of course," she said, "if that's what you want." The words were polite, but the space between them was not. At 11 a.m., Nadine stood beside Keza, looking at the fabric samples laid out on the table. "Do you have any ideas?" Keza asked. The question sounded open, but it wasn't. Not entirely. It was the kind of question that expected a certain answer, a safe answer. Something small, something easy to guide. Nadine hesitated. Her fingers brushed lightly against a piece of patterned cloth. She thought about the notebook, about the sketches, about the sentence that wouldn't leave her mind. "I think we should mix traditional patterns with sharper cuts," she said quietly. Keza nodded. "Yes, that could work," she replied. "But we need to keep it elegant. Not too bold, not too bold." Nadine heard it clearly, not as advice, but as a boundary. At 1:48 p.m., they presented initial ideas to Mama Chantal. Keza spoke first, confident, structured, clear. Nadine stood beside her, listening. Then Mama Chantal turned to Nadine. "And you?" A simple question, but it carried weight. Nadine took a breath, not deep, just enough. "I think we've been designing for what people expect," she said slowly. "But maybe we should design something they don't expect, but still recognize." The room stayed quiet, not because they didn't understand, but because it was different. Mama Chantal smiled slightly. "Show me," she said. At 3:22 p.m., Nadine opened the notebook again. This time, not hiding it, she turned it toward the table, toward everyone. "These are ideas I've been studying," she said, not claiming them, not denying them, just sharing. Keza looked at the pages, really looked for the first time. "These aren't yours?" she said quietly, not accusing, but noticing. Nadine nodded. "I know." A pause, then she added, "But what I create from them can be." The air shifted, not dramatically, but enough, because for the first time, Nadine wasn't stepping back. And for the first time, Keza didn't immediately step forward. At 5:05 p.m., as the workshop began to empty, Keza approached Nadine. "You've changed," she said. Not a question, a statement. Nadine looked at her. "Maybe I've just stopped hiding," she replied. Keza studied her for a moment, longer than usual, as if trying to understand something unfamiliar. "Just be careful," Keza said finally. "Not everyone is ready for different." Nadine didn't respond immediately. Then she says, "Maybe it's not about them being ready." Keza raised an eyebrow slightly. "Then what is it about?" Nadine held her gaze, for once not looking away. "It's about me being ready." The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was full of something new, something neither of them could ignore. Because change doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it begins the moment you stop agreeing with the version of yourself you used to accept. At exactly 8:21 a.m., the workshop no longer felt like a place of quiet routine. It felt like a space being watched, not by everyone, but by someone who was no longer comfortable. Nadine Uwas noticed it the moment she stepped in. The conversations didn't stop, but they softened when she passed. The looks didn't linger, but they were no longer absent. Keza was different, not colder, not openly distant, just more aware. At 9:10 a.m., they stood side by side again, reviewing fabrics for the Nairobi collection. Keza moved with her usual precision, efficient, controlled. I think we should keep the color palette safe, she said. Neutral tones sell better. Nadine ran her fingers across a bold patterned fabric. Bright, expressive, alive. What if we don't design to sell first? She asked quietly. What if we design to say something? Keza paused, just for a second, then smiled. That's a luxury, she replied, not a strategy. The words were light, but they landed heavy. At 10:56 a.m., Mama Chantal checked in on their progress. How are we doing? She asked. Keza answered immediately. We're aligning ideas, she said. Nadine didn't speak. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she was still deciding how much of herself she was willing to show. After Mama Chantal left, Keza turned to her. You don't have to prove anything, she said. It sounded supportive, almost kind. But something in her tone suggested otherwise. I'm not trying to prove anything, Nadine replied. Then why push so hard? Keza asked. A simple question, but not a simple intention. Nadine looked at her. For a moment, she almost stepped back again, almost returned to the version of herself that made everything easier. But she didn't. Because I've been holding back for too long, she said. Keza's smile faded slightly. Not completely, just enough. At 12:34 p.m., a supplier arrived with new materials. He greeted Keza first, naturally, then hesitated. Before nodding at Nadine, a small acknowledgement, but a noticeable one, Keza saw it even if she didn't react. At 2:09 p.m., they began sketching final concepts. Keza's designs were refined, predictable in the best way. They worked, they sold. Nadine's sketches were different, still learning, still evolving, but bold, not loud, but intentional. Keza watched her draw. You're changing the direction, she said, not accusing, but observing. Nadine didn't look up. I'm adding to it, she replied. Another pause, longer this time. Just don't forget where this started, Keza said. Nadine stopped drawing, finally looked at her. I haven't, she said, but maybe it wasn't supposed to stay the same. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but clear, because respect, when it appears in a place where it never existed before, doesn't always feel like recognition. Sometimes it feels like a threat. At 4:47 p.m., Mama Chantal reviewed both of their sketches. She didn't rush, didn't comment immediately. She studied carefully. Then she placed her hand on Nadine's page. This, she said softly, feels honest. The room went still. Not because Keza's work wasn't good. It was. But this was different, and everyone felt it. Keza nodded slowly. Professional, composed. Then we can refine it, she said. But her voice was tighter now, controlled in a way it hadn't been before. At 6:03 p.m., as the sun lowered over Kigali, Nadine packed her things. She felt tired, not physically, but emotionally, because being seen was harder than being invisible. As she stepped outside, she heard Keza's voice behind her. Nadine, she turned. Keza walked closer, not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate. You know this changes things, Keza said. Nadine held her gaze. I know, and you're okay with that. A question this time, real. Nadine didn't answer immediately. Then she said, I think things were already changing. Keza studied her, trying to understand, trying to measure. Then she nodded once, slowly. Then let's see where this goes, she said. Not a challenge, not a threat, but not support either. Something in between, something uncertain. And uncertainty is where most transformations begin. At exactly 8:08 a.m., the energy inside the workshop had shifted again. But this time, It wasn't subtle. It was controlled tension, the kind that sits beneath polite words, the kind that waits. Nadine Uwase felt it the moment she placed her bag down. No one avoided her, but no one ignored her either. And that difference was louder than anything. At 9:22 a.m., Kaiser gathered the fabric selections and reorganized them on the main table. "We need to finalize direction today," she said. "No more changes after this." Her tone was calm, but firm. Nadine stepped closer, sisking at the arrangement. Neutral tones, safe patterns. Clean lines, everything predictable. "This removes the contrast," Nadine said quietly. Kaiser didn't look at her immediately. "It removes risk, she replied. A pause. Then Nadine spoke again. "But the client didn't ask for safe." That was the moment. Kaiser turned, fully this time. "And the client didn't ask for confusion either," she said. The words were sharper now. Not loud, but clear. The room went quiet, not out of shock, but because everyone understood. This was no longer just about design. At 10:41 a.m., Mama Chantal walked in. "Have we agreed?" she asked. Kaiser answered first. "Yes, we're refining the concept." Nadine didn't speak, not immediately, because she realized something important. Agreement was being decided without her. Mama Nadine said, her voice steady, "I think we should show both directions." Another silence, different this time, more direct. Mama Chantal looked between them. "Both?" she asked. "Yes," Nadine replied. "Let the client choose." Kaiser exhaled slowly. "That's not how we present a strong vision," she said. Nadine met her gaze. "Or maybe it shows we have more than one." The tension was no longer hidden. At 12:05 p.m., they prepared two sets of designs, one led by Kaiser, polished, reliable, expected, one led by Nadine, bold, layered, uncertain, but alive. At 1:52 p.m., the client from Nairobi arrived via video call. Her face appeared on the tablet screen, composed and attentive. "Show me what you have," she said. Kaiser presented first, confident, clear, every detail explained with precision. The client nodded, impressed. Then Nadine stepped forward. Her hands didn't shake, but her voice carried something new, not confidence. "Not yet. But honesty, this version," she said, "is not designed to follow expectations, but to reflect identity." She didn't over-explain, didn't decorate her words. She simply showed. There was a pause, long enough to feel. The client leaned closer to the screen. "Who designed this?" she asked. This time no one answered for her. Nadine did. "I did." Two simple words. But they didn't sound small. They sounded grounded. The client nodded slowly. "I want this direction," she said. Just like that. No debate, no hesitation. The decision was made at 3:14 p.m. The call ended. The room stayed quiet, not celebratory, not tense. Just still. Because something had shifted, not in design. Kaiser stood by the table, her expression controlled, carefully composed. "You should be proud," she said. The words were correct, but the tone wasn't warm. Nadine didn't respond immediately, because she understood something now. Recognition changes relationships, not always for the better. At 4:38 p.m., as people began packing up, one of the seamstresses approached Nadine. "That was strong," she said quietly, a small compliment, but real. Nadine nodded. "Thank you. Simple but unfamiliar." At 6:11 p.m., as the workshop emptied, Kaiser remained. Waiting, Nadine noticed. "You stayed," Nadine, she said. Kaiser crossed her arms slightly. "I needed to understand something," she replied. Nadine didn't ask what. She already knew. "When did you decide to stop being the quiet one?" Kaiser asked. Nadine thought for a moment, then said, "I didn't decide to stop." A pause. "I just decided to stop agreeing." Kaiser looked at her, really looked this time, not as a friend, not as someone familiar, but as someone new. And that was the real shift, because losing control doesn't always look like failure. Sometimes it looks like someone else finally stepping into the space you thought would always belong to you. At exactly 7:58 a.m., Nadine Uwase walked into the workshop knowing something was different, not because of what she saw, but because of what she felt. The air was heavier. Not tense in an obvious way, but controlled, like something had already happened before she arrived. At 8:16 a.m., she noticed the design boards, rearranged, not unusual, except her sketches were no longer in the center. They had been moved to the side, not removed, just repositioned, subtly, deliberately. Nadine stood still for a moment, then walked closer. She didn't react immediately, didn't call anyone out, but she understood. This wasn't about organization. This was about control. At 9:03 a.m., Keza entered, composed, as always. "Morning," she said. Nadine looked at her. Morning, a simple exchange, but no longer empty. At 9:27 a.m., Mama Chantal gathered them again. "The client wants to see progress in person," she said. "They're sending a representative from Nairobi tomorrow." A ripple moved through the room. In person meant judgment. Closer, more real. "We'll present the collection together," Mama Chantal added. Keza nodded. Of course. Nadine didn't speak. She was still thinking about the board. At 10:12 a.m., as they prepared, Nadine quietly moved her sketches back to the center. Not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, just returning them, Keza noticed. Of course she did. "You moved them," Keza said. Not a question. Nadine met her eyes. Yes, a pause. Then Keza stepped closer. "I adjusted the layout for clarity," she said. Nadine didn't look away. "And I adjusted it back," she replied. Silence. Not loud, but final. Because for the first time, neither of them stepped back. At 11:46 a.m., Keza made her move, subtle, strategic. She approached Mama Chantal privately. "We need consistency," she said. "If the presentation feels divided, we risk losing the client." It sounded reasonable, professional, logical. Mama Chantal listened, then asked, "And what are you suggesting?" Keza hesitated, just enough. "Maybe one clear direction," she said. To avoid confusion, not directly removing Nadine, but close enough. At 1:05 p.m., Mama Chantal called Nadine aside. "Keza raised a concern," she said gently. Nadine nodded. "I expected that." Mama Chantal studied her. "This isn't about choosing sides," she said. "It's about delivering the best result." Nadine took a breath, then replied, "Then we should present the truth of the work." Mama Chantal tilted her head slightly. "And what is that?" Nadine answered without hesitation. "That this collection didn't come from one voice." A long pause. Then Mama Chantal present. "Then that's how we present it. Decision made clear. Balanced." At 3:33 p.m., final preparations began. Outfits arranged, sketches aligned, details refined, but beneath it all, the tension remained not explosive, but present. At 5:12 p.m., as the sun began to fade, Keza approached Nadine one last time. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. Nadine looked at her calmly. "Or maybe it was always this hard," she replied. "I just didn't speak before." Keza's expression tightened. "You think this is about fairness?" A sharper tone now. Finally, Nadine didn't react to the edge. "I think this is about truth," she said. Keza let out a quiet breath, then said, "Truth doesn't always win." Nadine held her gaze. "No," she replied softly. "But silence definitely loses." That was the line. Clear, uncrossable. At 6:28 p.m. the workshop emptied. But nothing felt resolved. Because some conflicts don't end when people stop talking. They end when something deeper shifts. And that shift was already happening. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Because once a person learns to take up space, they don't easily return to disappearing. At exactly 9:04 a.m., the workshop felt quieter than usual, not because fewer people were there, but because everyone was waiting. The representative from Nairobi had arrived, a woman in her early 40s, composed, observant, the kind of person who didn't speak quickly because she didn't need to. At 9:17 a.m., the presentation began. The designs were displayed carefully, every piece placed with intention, every detail visible. Mama Chantal stood slightly behind, letting them lead, as she had decided. "Please," the representative said, taking a seat, "walk me through your process." Keza stepped forward first, confident, poised. "This collection is built around balance," she said. "Tradition and modern elegance." Her voice was steady, her explanation flawless. It was what she had always done, and it worked. The representative nodded, listening. Then she turned. And you? She asked, looking at Nadine. Not as an afterthought, but as an equal. Nadine stepped forward. She didn't rush, didn't try to match Kaiser's tone. She spoke in her own. This collection didn't begin as a single idea, she said. It began as a conversation, a slight pause. Then she continued, between what we've always been told works and what we've been afraid to try. The room stilled, because this wasn't just explanation, it was truth. At 9:42 a.m., the representative stood and walked closer to the designs. She touched the fabrics, studied the cuts, looked longer at Nadine's pieces. These feel alive, she said softly. Not loud, but unmistakable. Keza heard it. Of course she did. At 10:08 a.m., the representative asked the question that shifted everything. Who led this direction? Silence. Short, but heavy, because this time, the answer mattered. Kiza opened her mouth, just slightly. A reflex, a habit, a role she had always stepped into. But before she could speak, Nadine did. We both contributed, she said, calm, steady, true. A pause. Then she added, but this direction came from a place I've been learning to trust. The words weren't aggressive. They weren't defensive. They were grounded. The representative nodded slowly, then looked at Keza. And you? A direct invitation. Keza held her posture, maintained her composure. For a moment, it seemed like she might say what she always had. Take control of the narrative. Shape it, own it. But something stopped her. Not fear, not hesitation. Something else, awareness, because this time, everyone was watching. Not just the room, but herself. She exhaled quietly, then said, two simple words, but heavier than anything she had said before. At 10:26 a.m., decisions was made. We'll move forward with this collection, the representative said, and I want both of you credited. Clear, final, fair. At 11:03 a.m., the meeting ended. The room slowly returned to movement. Voices, breathing, life. But something had changed. Not just externally, internally. At 12:18 p.m., Keza stood alone by the design board, looking at the sketches, not critically, not defensively. Just, honestly, Nadine approached. Not cautiously, not boldly, just present. You could have taken it, Nadine said quietly. Keza didn't look at her immediately. I know, she replied. A pause. Then she added, I've done it before. No denial, no excuse. Just truth. Nadine didn't respond right away, because sometimes acknowledgement is enough. At 1:47 p.m., Keza finally turned. Her expression wasn't cold, wasn't defensive, different. I didn't realize when it stopped being fair, she said. Nadine met her eyes. Maybe it never was, she replied. Not harsh, not accusing. Keza nodded slowly, accepting it. Not comfortably, but sincerely. At 3:09 p.m., Mama Chantal gathered them once more. I'm proud of both of you, she said. Simple, but meaningful, because pride was no longer directed at one person. It was shared, as it should have been, at 5:36 p.m. As the sun lowered over Kigali, the workshop emptied again. The silence felt different. Not heavy, not tense, but settled, because the truth had finally taken its place. Not forced, not hidden, just seen. And once truth is seen, it doesn't disappear again. At exactly 7:42, Kigali felt softer than usual, not quieter, not slower, just lighter. Nadine Uwaz walked toward the workshop with a steady pace, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't preparing herself to shrink. She was simply arriving. At 8:05 a.m., the doors opened. The same space, the same tables, the same fabrics, but everything felt different because she was different. At 8:27 a.m., Mama Chantal approached her. We received confirmation, she said with a warm smile. The Nairobi collection is moving forward. Full production. Nadine nodded, not surprised, but grateful. Thank you, she said, but real. At 9:11 a.m., the team gathered again. Plans were outlined, roles assigned, but this time, the structure was clearer, balanced, no longer centered around one voice. At 10:03 a.m., Keza stepped forward, not lead, but to contribute. A small shift, but a meaningful one. I'll handle the supplier coordination, she said. No hesitation, no need to control. Just, Nadine noticed. Of course she did, but she didn't react. Because not every change needs acknowledgement to be real. At 11:38 a.m., as work resumed, one of the younger designers approached Nadine. I've been watching you, she said quietly. Nadine looked up, curious. I didn't think someone like me could. Speak like that, the woman continued. Nadine smiled gently. Neither did I, she replied. And that was thus the truth. At 1:22 p.m., Nadine opened her notebook again. The same one. The same pages. But now, they weren't hidden, they were tools, not something she borrowed, but something she had built from. Her own voice, finally clear enough to follow. At 3:47 p.m., Mama Chantal stood by the window, watching the team. She didn't interrupt, didn't direct, she simply observed. Because sometimes, leadership isn't about control. It's about knowing when to step back. At 5:18 p.m., as the day came to a close, Kez approached Nadine one last time, not tense, not guarded, just honest. You've changed the space, she said. Nadine shook her head slightly. I think the space was always like this, she replied, a pause. Then she added, I just stopped adjusting myself to fit it. Kiza let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh. Maybe I did the opposite, she said. Not defensive, not ashamed, just aware. Nadine looked at her, and for the first time, there was no distance, no hierarchy, just two people, learning. At 6:02 p.m., the workshop emptied once more. The light outside turned golden, soft, fading, but not ending. Because endings aren't always about closure. Sometimes they're about clarity. Nadine stood alone for a moment, looking at the space, the table, the fabrics, the board. Then she picked up her bag and walked out. Not as the girl who was once called the ugly friend, not as the one who stayed silent, but as someone who had finally chosen which version of herself deserved to be seen and kept it. One peaceful afternoon at exactly 5:36 p.m., Nadine stood in the middle of the workshop, watching the women laugh and talk as they worked. There was no more distance, no more hesitation, only trust, built day by day. Thierry walked over quietly, placing proposal for expansion into Ghana on the table without saying a word. Nadine looked at him and smiled, not out of ambition, but because she knew she was ready. Outside, Kigali moved as it always did, busy and alive, but inside Nadine there was a different kind of calm. She was no longer chasing visibility, yet she was being recognized more than ever. Those who once doubted her now sought her opinion. Those who once stayed silent now spoke with confidence. And Nadine understood something deeply. Success is not about standing above others, but about helping more people stand strong beside you. As she closed the workshop door, the golden sunset spread across the familiar street, and for the first time, she didn't walk fast, because she was no longer afraid of being left behind. This story does not suggest that you must walk away from everyone who has ever hurt you. But it asks an important question. Are you shrinking yourself just to keep a relationship? Many of us are not diminished by strangers, but by those closest to us, people who, intentionally or not, define us in ways that make them feel more secure. The real danger is not what they say, but when we begin to believe it. Nadine didn't change because she became more perfect, but because she stopped letting others decide her worth. It was a quiet journey, not loud or dramatic, but deeply real. And perhaps the most powerful lesson is this. You don't need to become someone else to be recognized. You just need to stop disappearing.